Have you noticed something strange lately? Not something dramatic, not some miracle, not a sign in the sky. Something quieter, something almost impossible to explain. The conversations feel different. The people around you feel different. Even the places you've known for years feel strangely unfamiliar. And what unsettles you most is that you're starting to feel unfamiliar to yourself. Not because you're broken, not because you're lost, because a version of you is ending. And endings rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like winter entering a room through a cracked window. You don't notice it immediately, but eventually, everything feels colder. Pause for a moment. Think about the people who used to understand you, the people you once laughed with for hours, the people whose approval used to matter so much. Why does it feel harder now? Why do some conversations leave you exhausted instead of fulfilled? Why do certain rooms feel heavier than they used to? Why does your soul feel like it keeps looking towards something that doesn't exist yet? Most people misunderstand this stage. They call it loneliness. But loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes loneliness is standing between who you've been and who you're becoming. And that space can feel unbearable because nothing fully fits anymore. Not your old life, not your new one. You're suspended somewhere in between. That's where transformation begins. Not in certainty, not in confidence, not in victory, in confusion, in silence, in the strange feeling that something inside you is moving, while everything outside appears exactly the same. And that can be terrifying, because growth often looks like loss before it looks like gain. You lose certainty, you lose comfort, you lose old identities. You lose relationships that were built around versions of you that no longer exist. Nobody talks enough about this. People celebrate success. People celebrate breakthroughs. People celebrate arrivals. Very few people talk about what happens before them. The season where everything feels emotionally blurry. The season where you wake up tired even after sleeping. The season where your nervous system feels exhausted for reasons you can't explain. The season where you're grieving something, but you don't know exactly what it is. Maybe you're grieving your old self, the version that accepted less, the version that stayed small, the version that kept asking permission, the version that abandoned their own instincts just to belong. And maybe that's why this season feels so heavy, because you're not merely changing your circumstances, you're changing your identity. And identity shifts always feel like tiny deaths. Not physical deaths, psychological ones. The death of old beliefs, the death of old patterns, the death of old survival strategies. At first, you resist it. Everyone does. You try to reconnect with the old version. You revisit old habits, old conversations, old environments, old expectations. But something feels off, because growth changes your emotional taste. What once fed you now drains you. What once excited you now feels empty. What once defined you now feels too small. And that's when the fear arrives. The fear that maybe you're becoming disconnected. The fear that maybe you're becoming cold. The fear that maybe you're losing yourself. But what if the opposite is happening? What if you're finally meeting yourself? Not the version built from expectations. Not the version built from survival. The real one. The one hidden underneath years of adaptation. Think about how many decisions you've made because you wanted acceptance. Think about how many dreams you've delayed because you feared judgment. Think about how many times you've ignored your intuition because someone else's opinion felt louder. Eventually the soul grows tired. Not angry, not dramatic, just tired. Tired of performing, tired of shrinking, tired of pretending. And when the soul becomes tired enough, it starts pulling you toward authenticity. Even if authenticity costs comfort. That's why some people disappear from your life. Not because they're bad, not because you're better, because you no longer speak the same emotional language. And that's painful, because part of you still loves them. Part of you still remembers who you were together. Part of you still wants things to stay the same. But growth doesn't ask permission. It arrives anyway. Comment, I understand now, if you've felt this happening. Because what comes next goes even deeper. Most people think transformation is about becoming stronger, but real transformation is often about becoming more honest. Honest about what hurts. Honest about what you need. Honest about what no longer belongs in your life. Strength without honesty becomes armor, and armor eventually becomes a prison. Maybe that's why you've been feeling emotionally tired. Maybe you're carrying identities that no longer fit, responsibilities that were never yours, expectations that belong to other people, stories that were written before you knew who you really were. Imagine carrying a backpack for 20 years. You forget it's there. You forget how heavy it is. Then one day you put it down. At first, you feel strange, almost guilty. Then you realize you were never meant to carry it forever. That's what emotional awakening feels like. Not gaining something, releasing something. And the release isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it happens in silence. A boundary you finally enforce. A conversation you no longer chase. A door you stop knocking on. A person you stop convincing. A dream you finally admit you want. Tiny moments. Life-changing consequences. And here's the strange part. The more aligned you become, the more misunderstood you may feel. Because people often recognize your old identity better than your new one. They remember who you were, not who you're becoming. And if you're not careful, you'll abandon your growth just to remain recognizable. Don't do that. Because your future requires a version of you that your past cannot fully understand. Read that again. Your future requires a version of you that your past cannot fully understand. That's why this season feels lonely. You're meeting someone new. Yourself. And every meaningful relationship begins with learning. Learning takes time. Learning requires patience. Learning requires space. The same is true here. Give yourself permission to become unfamiliar. Give yourself permission to evolve. Give yourself permission to disappoint expectations that were never meant to define your life. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need everyone to approve. You don't need everyone to stay. Some people are chapters, not the whole story. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop forcing a chapter to become a book. The silence around you isn't punishment. The distance isn't abandonment. The uncertainty isn't failure. These are symptoms of transition. And transitions always feel unstable while they're happening. But one day you'll look back. You'll remember this version of yourself. The one sitting quietly with questions. The one wondering why everything felt different. The one afraid of letting go. And you'll realize something. Nothing was falling apart. Everything was rearranging itself. Not against you. For you. Slowly. Patiently. Quietly. Like dawn replacing darkness. Not all at once, but enough to change everything. So if you've been feeling disconnected, if you've been feeling alone, if you've been feeling like your old life can no longer hold you, maybe that's because it's true. Maybe the container became too small. Maybe you've grown. Maybe you've changed. Maybe you're finally becoming the person you were always meant to be. And that process is not easy. It is not comfortable. It is not always beautiful, but it is sacred. Because every meaningful life contains a moment when the old self can no longer continue. This might be that moment for you. Not the end. The beginning, the quiet beginning nobody notices, except you. And sometimes, that's where the most powerful stories start. If this resonated with you, comment, I won't go back. Because some doors are meant to close. Some identities are meant to end. And some versions of you were only meant to carry you this far. The next chapter requires someone new. And that someone is already emerging. But before the next chapter fully opens, before the clarity arrives, Before the peace you've been searching for finally settles into your life, there is a stage almost nobody talks about. A stage that catches people off guard. A stage so uncomfortable that many turn back before they ever discover who they were becoming. It's the cost of evolution. And the strange thing about evolution is that it rarely feels empowering while it's happening. It feels disorienting. It feels lonely. It feels like standing in a room where everyone else received instructions except you. You look around and wonder why ordinary conversations suddenly feel exhausting. Why things that once excited you barely move you anymore. Why you're surrounded by people, yet somehow feel more alone than ever. At first, you think something is wrong. You wonder if you're becoming distant. You wonder if you're becoming cold. You wonder if you've lost your ability to connect. But what if the truth is much simpler? What if you're not becoming disconnected from life, but disconnected from a life you've already outgrown? Because growth creates a strange kind of tension. One part of you is reaching toward the future. Another part keeps looking over its shoulder. The future feels uncertain. The past feels familiar, and familiarity is seductive. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Most people don't realize this. The human brain values familiarity more than happiness. That's why people stay in relationships that drain them. That's why people remain in environments that shrink them. That's why people repeat patterns that no longer serve them. The mind whispers, "At least I know what this pain feels like." And that feels safer than uncertainty. So when you begin changing, your mind often interprets growth as danger. Not because growth is dangerous, because it's unfamiliar. And that's when the internal battle begins. You start missing versions of yourself that were never truly happy. You romanticize old chapters. You remember the highlights and forget the cost. You remember the comfort. You forget the compromise. You remember belonging. You forget the loneliness hidden beneath it. And little by little, you begin questioning your own evolution. Maybe I should go back. Maybe I was happier then. Maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe I should stop changing. Maybe I should become who I used to be. But the soul knows. The soul always knows. And once the soul has seen beyond a certain point, it can never fully return. You can revisit old rooms, but they won't feel the same. You can return to old habits, but they won't satisfy you. You can rejoin old conversations, but something inside you will know you've already moved beyond them. That realization hurts, because growth isn't just gaining a new identity. It's grieving an old one, and grief is rarely logical. Some days you'll miss people who were wrong for you. Some days you'll miss environments that limited you. Some days you'll miss a version of yourself that was suffering, not because those things were good, because they were familiar. And familiarity leaves emotional fingerprints. There are nights during transformation when nothing feels certain. The future feels foggy, the present feels heavy, and the past keeps calling your name. Those are dangerous nights. Not because you'll fail, because you'll be tempted to settle. You'll be tempted to exchange growth for comfort, vision for security, purpose for predictability. And many people do, not because they're weak, because they're tired. Transformation is exhausting. Nobody talks about that enough. Everyone talks about becoming. Nobody talks about what it costs. Nobody talks about the emotional fatigue, the nervous system exhaustion, the decision fatigue, the invisible weight of constantly shedding old layers. Imagine carrying armor your entire life. Armor that protected you. Armor that helped you survive. Armor that kept you safe. Then one day someone tells you, you don't need it anymore. You should feel relieved, but instead you feel exposed. Because protection becomes identity, and identity doesn't disappear quietly. It fights for survival. Maybe that's why you've felt so conflicted lately. Part of you wants freedom. Part of you wants familiarity. Part of you wants expansion. Part of you wants certainty. Both voices are speaking at the same time, and that's exhausting. But here's what few people understand. The discomfort you're feeling isn't proof you're on the wrong path. It's often proof you're leaving an old one. And leaving hurts. Even when leaving is necessary. Even when leaving is healthy. Even when leaving saves your future. Because every meaningful transformation requires a season where you no longer belong to your old life, but haven't fully arrived in your new one. That in-between season is where many people quit. Not because they lack potential, because they mistake transition for failure. Listen carefully. You are not failing because things feel uncertain. You are not lost because the old map no longer works. You are not broken because your old identity no longer fits. You are changing, and change is rarely graceful. Sometimes it looks like confusion. Sometimes it looks like withdrawal. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone, wondering what happened to the person you used to be. The answer is simple. That person carried you as far as they could, but they were never meant to carry you forever. And maybe, just maybe, the version emerging now is stronger than you realize. Not louder, not harder, not more impressive, just more real. And that changes everything. There comes a moment in every transformation when the panic starts fading. Not completely, just enough. Enough for you to hear something beneath the noise. Something quieter, something wiser. A truth that was impossible to hear while fear was screaming. And the truth is this: not everything that leaves is a loss. Some things leave because they have completed their purpose. Some relationships, some identities, some dreams, some versions of yourself. They weren't failures, they were chapters. And chapters are not supposed to last forever. For a long time, you believed your life was falling apart. You saw people leaving, plans changing, doors closing, opportunities disappearing. And naturally, you assumed something had gone wrong. But years later, many people look back and discover something remarkable. The very events they called setbacks were actually redirections. The very disappointments they hated became the reason they found their path. The very losses they resisted created room for something greater. At the time, they couldn't see it. Neither can you sometimes. Because transformation happens underground before it becomes visible above ground. Just like roots. Nobody celebrates roots. Nobody posts pictures of roots. Nobody applauds roots. Yet roots determine everything. The stronger the roots, the greater the growth. And perhaps that's what this season has really been. A rooting season, a hidden season, a preparation season. Not glamorous, not exciting, but necessary. Think about how much has changed inside you already. You notice things you once ignored. You value things differently. Your standards have changed. Your boundaries have changed. Your definition of success has changed. Even your relationship with yourself has changed. That isn't nothing. That's evidence. Evidence that transformation is already happening. The problem is that we often expect change to arrive dramatically. Like lightning, like fireworks, like some grand announcement. But real transformation is usually quieter. It happens while nobody is watching, while nobody is applauding, while nobody understands, and then one day, the results become impossible to ignore. Suddenly you're responding differently. Suddenly you're choosing differently. Suddenly you're no longer chasing things that once controlled you. Suddenly you're no longer desperate for validation. Suddenly you're becoming someone your old self wouldn't recognize. And that's when everything starts returning. Not necessarily the exact things you lost. Something better, a deeper peace, a stronger identity, a clearer purpose, a more authentic life. Because true restoration isn't getting your old life back. It's creating a life that no longer requires you to abandon yourself. Read that again. True restoration isn't getting your old life back. It's creating a life that no longer requires you to abandon yourself. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop obsessing over what left. You stop chasing closure. You stop trying to force outcomes. You stop trying to resurrect expired chapters. Because you realize something profound. The future doesn't need your old identity. The future needs the person you've been becoming all along. That's why this season mattered. That's why the loneliness mattered. That's why the uncertainty mattered. That's why the waiting mattered. Not because life was punishing you, because life was preparing you. The roots were growing. The foundation was strengthening. The person you needed to become was emerging, quietly, patiently, one difficult lesson at a time. And now, whether you fully see it or not, the return has already begun. Not the return of who you were, the return of who you've always been beneath the fear, beneath the conditioning, beneath the survival patterns, beneath the expectations. The real you, the one that no longer needs permission, the one that no longer needs to shrink, the one that no longer needs to apologize for growing. And perhaps that's why you found this message today. Not to be reminded of your pain, but to be reminded of your progress. Because you've come farther than you realize. You've survived more than you acknowledge. You've grown more than you can currently see. And the chapter opening in front of you now was built by every difficult moment you thought was breaking you. Nothing was wasted. Not the tears, not the confusion, not the delays, not the silence. All of it became part of the foundation. And now the foundation is strong enough for the life you're stepping into. So when the doubt returns, remember this. You are not who you were a year ago. You are not who you were 6 months ago. You are not who you were when this journey began. Something has changed. Something has awakened. Something has matured. And because of that, the next chapter won't require a stronger version of you. It will require a more authentic one. The person you've been becoming all along. And this time, don't shrink to fit the old story. The old story has ended. The new one is already being written.